So in the last sessions, we have seen the scientific development, the modern science and its impact on the concept of paradigms. The paradigms that have been operating in Europe, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries, 18th and 19th centuries. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Newtonian model, that is the mechanistic model, was refuted very emphatically by the discovery in science, especially physics. Other branches of science followed suit a little later, but in physics it was very, very clear right from the beginning of the 20th century that the mechanistic paradigm is not the whole story. It is applicable only in a limited sense. Therefore, the fundamental assumptions of the mechanistic paradigm had to be revised. This we have seen in the special theory of relativity as well as general theory of relativity, followed by quantum mechanics and other developments in science. Today we shall discuss one of the most important philosophies from the point of practical dominance. Across the world, communism had a major impact. It began with them in the middle of 19th century, starting from around, if you want to fix a date, it may be around 1848. That is when the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx was published, 1848. Later on, that was a very small book, maybe about 100 pages or so. But later he published his magnum opus, that it's called the Das Kapital, which came out in 1865 and thereabout. It had several volumes. In fact, Marx had collected materials and written them, but it was Engels who edited them and finally got it published. Engels was a friend of Marx. It is not enough if we call him a friend. He was the alter ego of Marx. It's something, if you want to compare it, it is something like Rama and Lakshman. They were always together, and one would make decisions for both of them. That one was Marx. Engels was a brilliant man, a very, very closely followed Marx's ideas and ideals, and helped him to edit, helped him to define, helped him to get it published. And then at a personal level, he accepted blames for the failings of Marx. Very close friend, very reliable friend. And in the later stages of Marx's life, when he was financially broke, Engels supported him with a lot of financial help. So it is this theory which had tremendous impact on the human thinking across the globe, and it had a political implications in the form of communist regimes in Asia, in Europe, in South America, and many places across the world. It started around 1917, the first revolution, communist revolution occurred in 1917 at Russia. And they took charge of Russia and then started influencing the political outcome of various countries across the world. And many countries followed suit and became communist. By around 1980, that is about 65 years later, about 1/3 of the human population was under the communist flag, red flag. That is the kind of influence they had. That is the kind of rapidity with which communism spread. I don't think in human history there is any other ideology which has spread so fast, so fast. And I don't see any other ideology which has collapsed so rapidly, so rapidly. Within a few years, it collapsed completely. Today, there are communist countries, or it is better stated that people who claim themselves to be communists, not really communist countries. They are not communist anymore. They are not observing the principles of communism anymore, but they still claim the shell is communist. So they claim themselves to be communist, but not really communist. That kind of countries are there. But communism as a philosophy has collapsed, and there are no takers for that today. Only in India, you have a very small minority of people, intellectuals, whose support base is dwindling. One election after another election, if you see, their number is reducing, and their influence is certainly reducing across the country. We shall discuss the foundation of this principle, this philosophy. This philosophy is based on the mechanistic paradigm. The reason why we discussed the scientific theories is to show that this mechanistic paradigm was refuted, but communism depends upon the mechanistic paradigm, and it considers it as gospel truth. It is not just a lay attachment to that, just like capitalism. Capitalism also is materialistic paradigm only, mechanistic paradigm only, but its attachment is not so strong. Whereas Marxism or communism claims to be a complete philosophy of life based on the materialistic outlook of the world. So it is important to study this. We have 3 sections in this, and if possible, I will cover all the 3, but if not possible, I will cover the first 2 of them. First, let us look at what is capitalism. Capitalism is also known as the political economy. The formalism of the capitalistic ideology were formalized by Adam Smith, a Scottish philosopher and an economist who was an author and who wrote his magnum opus called The Wealth of Nations in 1776. It certainly is a very influential book, very well argued, very well presented book. And it was Adam Smith who formalized, and he formalized capitalism, saying that selfishness is good. Most of if you look at the religious philosophies across the world, they would say that selfless work and selfless service is laid a great of stress upon. But this capitalism is one philosophy which says that selfishness is good. In Smith's day, people saw national wealth in terms of countries' stock of gold and silver. Importing goods from abroad meant that this wealth must be given up to pay for them. Exporting goods was seen as good because these precious metals came back. When you export, you get gold and silver back into your country. That is considered to be positive. But import was not considered positive because you are selling your gold for some commodities. But Adam Smith argued against this viewpoint. He said that wealth is not to be counted in terms of rupees or gold coins. It has to be counted as the gross national produce, for which if you want to import goods, it is welcome. So this is the foundation of free market economy. Smith argued that in a free exchange would benefit both sides. Imports are just as valuable as our exports to others. A nation's wealth is not the quantity of gold and silver in its vaults, but the total of its production and commerce. What today we would call as gross national product. Freedom and self-interest need not produce chaos. He is arguing for open market. He said freedom and self-interest need not produce chaos, but as if guided by an invisible hand, this is his phrase, it can produce order and concord. And as people struck bargains with each other, the nation's resources would be drawn automatically to the ends and purposes that people valued most highly. He argued, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher or the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner. He says that we go and buy things in the market and bring it home, cook our food, but we are not expecting the vendor to be charitable to us. It is not for his benevolence that we look. We pay him, we buy this. But in the payment is in his interest, and in his selling it to us is our interest. And therefore it is a mutual interest, it is a win-win situation that will sustain the market interaction. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher or the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. If you deal with me, it is to your own advantage. That's how we try to convince. This is the marketing philosophy. As every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own security and his own benefit. And by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was not part of his intention. It may lead to something, it is not part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. It is the self-interest drive most people in the society. 99% or 99.9%. Very few individuals can put down their self-interest and work. If it is not selfishness, it is self-interest. One has to sustain himself. For that, people work. So it is looking at it from a positive, rational point of view. He argued for free economy, and which was accepted by the public and the society's group. I only want to point out that there is a difference between this approach and the approach of the spiritual paradigm. While accepting that self-interest drives most people, the spiritual paradigm also puts a premium on selfless work. It is not expected that the bulk of the society will follow this. It is always a minority, an extremely small minority, which will follow that. If we refer to Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says somewhere that how many people are interested in spirituality? Very few. 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000 is 0.1%. That is the kind of number in a society would be interested in the pursuit of spirituality as per Bhagavad Gita. But Gita is expounded with a lot of emphasis on Karma Yoga and many other yogas, where in Karma Yoga, it is treated as a royal path meant for those who are interested. As selflessness is advocated. What purpose? The purpose is the purpose of life. Spirituality, the final jnanam, the moksha, that is the purpose. What kind of people are able to do it? Very special people are able to do it, but then it is desirable that society has a substantial percentage. When I say substantial, it is a very small, but even so, even if it is 0.1%, they work, they function as a salt of the earth. It is in that sense that the spiritual paradigm advises its followers as self-interest is the basis of capitalism is fine. Business acumen implies promotion of one's own self-interest by linking into the self-interest of others, creating a win-win situation. However, the spiritual paradigm warns mankind against unbridled selfishness, reminds man that life is transitory, and suggests that one should live by dharma in the larger interest of family and society. This is a Subhashita. Ajara maravat prajno vidyam arthancha sadhaye grihita iva kesheshu mrityuna dharmam acharet. Prajna, he is referring to Prajna. Men of wisdom pursue knowledge and wealth as if life would last till eternity. Ajara maravat prajno vidyam arthancha sadhayet. Grihita ivakesheshu mrityuna dharmamacharet. Being aware that of the invisible hand of death tugging at your hair, perform dharma. This is what the spiritual paradigm would advise. Yeah. Now we'll look at the communist theory, which is the essential subject of today's talk. Communism, the philosophy. I will first introduce some terminologies here. We have discussed spiritual paradigm based on the Vedic philosophy. And if you look at communism, it is exactly opposite. Exactly opposite. If the Vedas claim that spirit or God or consciousness, Satchidananda, is the basis of this creation, Marx claimed that matter is the fundamental item is the matter, and that is the basis of creation. It is exactly opposite. Marx derived his philosophy partially from the rudiments of Hegelian dialectics. Hegel was a German philosopher around 1760, that period. And Hegel presented what is known as a dialectics. Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah. Hegel presented, his concept is that there is something called idea. See, if you look at this matter and spirit, they fall in the extreme ends of the line. In between, we have discussed this. There is a body, indriyas, prana, mana, that is emotions and memory, then thought, and then conscience, which is a very subtle and elusive item. But then as the basis of the universe, we discussed consciousness. But if you take these two things at the extreme ends, Hegel's idea or ideal, both terms are used, idea falls in between. What is conceived in the mind is the idea. And Hegel spoke about dialectics. Dialectics originally means that it is a jijnasa. Jijnasa means not really debate, but jijnasa means discussion for the sake of truth. The ego should be in the background, it should recede to the background, and the idea should be discussed on the table, placed before the table and discussed with the purpose of arriving at the truth. That is called jijnasa, that is called the dialectics. The original dialectics in the West were Socrates, Plato, and that kind of people, the Greek philosophers. Hegel picked it up from there. And in India, of course, dialectics have always been there, jijnasa in the Upanishads, the discussion, not for the purpose of show, not for the purpose of debate, but for the purpose of knowledge. Okay, Hegel talked about idea, how the ideas evolve. He said, okay, the idea begins in the mind, it is called the thesis, but then eventually it will have an antithesis developed from within, and the thesis and the antithesis will have an arrangement between themselves, a discussion between themselves, and then emerges a synthesis. It is something like this. I want to build a house and I want bathroom fittings. So I believe that I want a particular type of fittings. But my wife will have a separate idea. She wants a different kinds of fittings. So there is a thesis, and then the thesis gives rise to an antithesis. And then we discuss, we give it a couple of days, and then we come to a new arrangement, that is synthesis. So Hegel said his dialectics is that ideas will be born in the mind and it will develop as a thesis, and the thesis would give rise to an antithesis, and the thesis and antithesis will interact and then give rise to a new synthesis. That was Hegelian dialectics. Marx adopted this and changed it a bit. There is another aspect of the idea which Hegel talks about, is that first a concept arises in the mind and then it manifests in the external world. It is like saying, if I want to build a house, I need a plan. I mean, this is generally accepted everywhere today. Of course, if we want to implement a project, we need a planning for the project. So that is what Hegel's philosophy is, in short, in very simplistic terms. Marx adopted this, but then Marx inverted it and saying that the idea first and manifestation later in the external world, he reversed it and said, idea comes as a reflection of the material changes in the external world. It is in that sense, Marx said matter is more fundamental than idea. So Marx's philosophy, Marxian philosophy, is called dialectical materialism. And it is claimed that it is a complete philosophy of life. Unlike Adam Smith did not pose to be presenting a complete philosophy of life. He presented an idea, a philosophy, yes, of political economy, but did not claim it to be of a fundamental nature. Whereas Marx claimed it to be a complete philosophy of life. According to Marx, thought is nothing but reflection of matter in motion upon human mind. It is the external world that influences thought, not the other way around. Marxism says there are laws governing this universe, the material creation, material world, as well as the human world. Human beings are also governed by similar laws as the material world. If you are talking about a gravitational law governing the material world, similar laws exist for human beings as well, because human beings are nothing but the manifestation of matter. Not only human beings, human society. Society is a much larger, much more complex organism than a human being. Human being himself is a very, very complex organism. He has something called mind, something called life, something called consciousness, which are inexplicable. But a society which contains millions of people, it is an organism. If you conceive it as an organism, it is far more complex than the individual being. The rules that apply to individual being are not automatically applicable to the society. It is far more complex. But Marx said that the human beings are governed by laws, as well as the society is also governed by similar laws, and the laws are inexorable. They will function as ruthlessly as any other physical law. And he said, these laws will operate in such a way that the progression of human society can be predicted. He said human society initially was a primitive society long, long ago. Later it became an agrarian society. Later a feudal society. And later a capitalist industrial society. Then which eventually will give rise to a socialistic society, and then finally end up in a communist society. Agrarian and feudal and capitalist. Capitalist is the time he is referring to. The European capitalist society is the time of the colonies, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, when Europe was gaining power because of industrial revolution, and it was expanding in all directions. There was a renaissance. There was a burst of activity. There was wealth, the colonies, all these kind of things. He calls it as the capitalist society. And as the industrial society matures, it will give rise to revolutions. Revolutions he sees in every stage, actually. So the thesis, antithesis, giving rise to synthesis, this happens at every stage. So the capitalistic society will eventually give rise to a revolution, and the revolution will end up in a socialistic society. When you say socialist society, he is referring to the dictatorship of the proletariat, of the labor class will take over, the communists will take over the control of the society, and they will capture the distribution system, they will capture the economy, and everything will be state controlled, and that state will make an equitable distribution of the wealth. Each one according to his capacity will contribute. Each one according to his need will take. So there is justice, and because of this justice, when the people feel that it is a just society, then you don't even need a state. The state will wither away, giving rise to a stateless, classless society that is called the communist society. Marx predicted that the humanity will be progressing in this direction, and in spite of itself, it cannot be otherwise. This is an inexorable law. And the law he conceived is his dialectic materialism, expounds that law. Marx also claimed that his theory is a scientific theory based on the mechanistic model. Obviously, he was writing it around 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. The model that he was talking about, the scientific model, was the mechanistic model. If the mechanistic model looks at creation as a clockwork, which is governed by a law, which he is claiming, Marx also is claiming that. And if you know the state of the society at this instant of time completely, it is difficult to get a complete picture of the society, but then if you know it completely, a hypothetical statement, and you also know the law, which is communism, you can predict the future of this society accurately to any length of time. What will happen next? What will happen next? This you can predict. You can also look back and say, this is how it has happened. You can reconstruct the past accurately without error. This is his thesis. There is no God in this. There is, see, all concept of God and conscience, and the idea, the domination of idea, he calls it as idea. See, whatever arises in the mind, any subjective thought is an idea. So this consciousness or God or conscience, what you say, Atmasakshi, all these things are bunkam. They are various forms of idea, and which is a manifestation of matter, movement of matter, motion of matter in the external world. All thought is manifestation of matter. Mind is a manifestation of matter. There is nothing called God. God is a concept conceived and propagated by the ruling class, which wants to exploit the general public. Most of them are the proletariat. To keep them under control, this is used as a deceiving device. That is the communist idea. Marx's doctoral thesis dealt with atomism. Atoms are defined as tiny, invisible particles, extremely small particles. Newton conceived it, but originally it was propounded by the Greek philosophers. There are two names, Epicurus and Democritus. In the 3rd, 4th century BC, that is the period, they had conceived it, and Newton had formalized it, and he said they're hard, unbreakable particles. Those atoms are the basic components of all matter. So Marx was depending upon that. It was his thesis was on that topic. So the basis of materialism of Marx lies on that idea. Materialism asserts the primacy of the material world. In short, matter precedes thought. Materialism is a realist philosophy of science, which holds that the world is material, that all phenomena in the universe consist of matter in motion. All phenomena in the universe consist of matter in motion, wherein all things are interdependent and interconnected and develop according to natural law. That the world exists outside us and independently of our perception of it. Whether you perceive it or not, the world exists. Whether you're awake or sleeping, the world still exists and it functions. That thought is a reflection of the material world in the brain, and that the world is in principle knowable. His accent on science and his accent on the supremacy of the human intellect. He says it is knowable. The ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought. This, in a sense, is Marxism. Materialism is a form of philosophical monism. Monism is the term used for Advaita. So he says that it is a philosophical monism that is saying matter is supreme, that holds that matter is the fundamental substance in nature, and that all things, including mental states and consciousness, are results of material interactions. According to philosophical materialism, mind and consciousness are byproducts of material processes, such as the biochemistry of the human brain and nervous system. So the biochemistry is responsible for the thought. That's what he's saying. See, this approach is essentially coming from the materialistic perspective. See, in psychology, there is a category known as psychiatry. And many psychiatrists, if you go to them for consultation, seeking advice on or treatment of depression, they will recommend immediately, they will recommend some drugs. See, the idea is controlling your mind using chemicals. This is a materialistic perspective. Modern medicine, the allopathic medicine actually revels in this idea. So you will see that this thought has influenced many fields. I will recount it at the end. But this is materialistic outlook. Whereas if you say there is a class of psychosomatic diseases where a person's thought or mind is influencing his body and the disease is manifesting in a body, you are saying that it is the other way around. It is a Hegelian approach. That is, the idea is influencing the material world. That is not Marxism. It is quite the opposite of that. Anyway. This concept directly contrasts with idealism, where mind and consciousness are first-order realities to which matter is subject, and material interactions are secondary. From the inside, it manifests outside. That is called idealism. From outside, it enters inside, controls the inner thought process of humans. That is called materialism. Hegel's dialectics. Dialectics is a method of argument for resolving disagreement. The word dialectic originated in ancient Greece and was made popular by Plato in the Socratic dialogues. It was popularized by Socrates, actually. Socrates would begin his discussion saying that I do not know anything. I wish to know. Please help me know. And therefore, he keeps asking questions. Very innocuous, simple questions. But as he progresses, he will know more. So Socrates is credited with a statement that I know one thing, that I know nothing. It is from that platform he begins. So that is called dialectics. The dialectical method is discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject who wish to establish the truth of the matter guided by reasoned arguments. Hegelian dialectic, usually presented in a threefold manner, as comprising three dialectical stages of development. A thesis giving rise to its reaction, an antithesis, which contradicts or negates the thesis, and the tension between the two being resolved by means of a synthesis. Hegel ascribed that terminology to Kant. This is Hegelian dialectic. There is a tension between thesis and antithesis, but it is not a war, it is not a conflict, but it is being resolved in the form of a synthesis. Synthesis will be certainly a better idea than the thesis. So it will have a higher level of sophistication. This is what Hegel presented. But the other aspect of Hegelian thought is that the idea will originate first and its manifestation in the outer world later. Karl Marx accepted, he didn't accept it, he took ideas from this Hegelian dialectics and developed into his own thought. My dialectic, says Karl Marx, my dialectic method is not only different from the Hegelian, but is its direct opposite. To Hegel, the life process of the human brain, the process of thinking, which under the name of the idea, he even transforms into an independent subject, is the demiurgos. I think it's a Greek term, a subordinate deity of the real world. And the real world is only the external phenomenal form of the idea. With me, on the contrary, the ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into forms of thought. The Marxian dialectic is different in the sense that he said there is a thesis, which is the primitive society, which gives rise to a development. The development he is conceiving is in economic terms. And this growth and development in economy will give rise to two separate classes, initially not very distinct, not clearly identifiable, not clearly can be separated, distinguished, but eventually that distinction will become more and more clear as the society evolves. But there will be two classes, and there will be tension between the two classes, and the tension will lead to a conflict. Hegel did not say conflict. Hegel said there is a tension, yes, but then it will be resolved. But here, the resolution occurs but through a conflict. And in a conflict, invariably, the proletariat side will win. Proletariat side will win, and it will establish a new synthesis. That is a higher level of society. And this dialectic, this development will cause the human society to progress from the primitive society to agrarian society, agrarian to feudal, feudal to industrial, industrial to socialist, communist, and then finally it will result in a classless, stateless society. When will this happen? This was not clearly predicted. It is like the second coming of Jesus. It is not known when it will happen. When will the Qiyamah happen? It is not known, but it is predicted that it will happen. Yeah. So all conflicts are class wars, according to Marx. He classifies them as the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeois for supremacy. So it can lead to very severe and bloody conflicts, class wars. Materialist conception of history. Marx defined everything in life. He defined history, he defined economy, he defined politics, he defined everything, including the family and other things. Only thing is that his Das Kapital does not cover everything in great detail, but he said that today's need is that we have to focus on the social issues rather than the physical science issues or material science issues. Historical materialism, also known as the materialist conception of history, is a methodology used by some communist and Marxist historiographers that focuses on human societies and their development through history, arguing that history is the result of material conditions rather than ideals. It is principally a theory of history which asserts that the material conditions of a society's mode of production, or in Marxist terms, the union of a society's productive forces and relations of production, fundamentally determine society's organization and development, mode of production and distribution. Economic terms, mode of production and distribution, they decide the condition of the society. Attempting to show that socialism and communism are scientific necessities rather than philosophical ideals. Please note the shift. He's not talking about an idea or an ideal, but he is talking about material realities, scientific necessities. Science is a very respectable term in Marxism. Marxism claims to be scientific and it holds science in a very high esteem. And when he says scientific, he is actually meaning materialistic. Science need not be only materialistic, but Marxian terminology, when he uses the word scientific, it means materialistic. The evolution of scientific thought under proletarian auspices has been the opposite of that under bourgeois auspices. The urgent job of the proletariat under capitalist domination was less to increase the productive forces of society, as the bourgeois was compelled to do under the feudal rule, than to free the already highly developed productive forces from the dead hand of capitalist ownership and control. This is Engels, that is Marx's colleague Engels, theorizing. He says, see, Marx and Engels, that is we two, have developed the law of communism or materialism, dialectical materialism, as pertaining to the society. We did not work so much on the material sciences. The reason is that the material sciences will result in technological development and it will change the methods of production. Industrial Revolution did that. It altered the mode of production. It relieved the labor from backbreaking labor and automized, improvised, altered, mechanized, so many things it did in the course of development. What Newton or Galileo did resulted in this kind of developments. That is right. That is scientific. Ours also is scientific. Only thing is we are focusing more on the human society and we are trying to explore the laws that govern the human society, whereas Newton and others have done it on the material world. That's what he is saying. See, the proletariat under capitalist domination, the urgent job of the proletariat under the capitalist domination was less to increase the productive forces of society. That is, technological development and other things have already been taken care of, and it has given rise to a capitalist society, and the owners of these capital industries They have monopolized the wealth, and the urgent need is to release this wealth from the hands of these capitalists. And that is why we are focusing on the social sciences. That's what his argument is. This explains why Marxism, the scientific method of the revolutionary proletarian movement, proletarian means labor movement, concentrated attention in the first phase of its activity upon the solution of historical, social, and economic problems. Practical necessity dictated that the most pressing theoretical problems in the sphere of social phenomena be solved first. Although the theory of dialectical materialism was essentially a universal system of thought, embracing both nature and society, its detailed application to the theoretical problems of the natural sciences had to be postponed for later consideration. He said, we are focusing on economics. Engels writes, the old teleology means explanation of phenomena in terms of purpose. It is the purpose that shapes the method, not the cause. Whereas Marxism talks about the cause in the material world reflecting as idea. Whereas the old teleology talks about ideal shaping the material world. So Engels claims that the old teleology has gone to the devil. But now we have the knowledge that matter in its perpetual circulation moves according to laws that at certain stages, now here, now there, necessarily produce the thinking mind in organic existence. Movement of matter conditions the thought. And they claim that the scientific development, the new findings in science have endorsed the Marxian philosophy. This is Lenin, maybe in the second decade of 20th century. The time when Einstein was working on the special theory of relativity and general theory of relativity and refuting the mechanistic model. And there are several new findings, not only in relativity, but also in quantum mechanics and other related fields. And Lenin claims that all these findings have endorsed Marxism. The reality is that they were refuting the fundamental model of Marxism, but Lenin claims that it has endorsed. The philosophy of Marxism is materialism. Marx did not stop at 18th century materialism. 18th century materialism. He developed a philosophy to a higher level. The main achievement was dialectics. That is, the doctrine of development in its fullest, deepest, and most comprehensive form. The doctrine of the relativity of the human knowledge that provides us with a reflection of eternally developing matter. The latest discoveries of natural science, such as radium, electrons, the transmutation of elements, etc., have been a remarkable confirmation of Marx's dialectical materialism, despite the teachings of the bourgeois philosophers with their new inversions to old and decadent idealism. What was happening in the scientific field, he castigates them as bourgeois philosophers and says that they were in fact, their findings were in fact endorsement of Marxian theory. Of course, Lenin can be excused for this because one thing is that he was not a scientist. second thing is that he was a communist. Marxist view of history, Engels. The materialist conception of history starts from the proposition that production of the means to support human life, and next to production, the exchange of things produced. That is production and distribution, production and exchange, production and marketing is the basis of all social structure. See the claim is complete and comprehensive. Is the basis of all social structure. That in every society that has appeared in history, the manner in which wealth is distributed and society divided into classes or orders is dependent upon what is produced, how it is produced, and how the products are exchanged. From this point of view, the final causes of all social changes and political revolutions are to be sought. The cause has to be sought, not the effect. The cause has to be sought in economics. Not in men's brains, not in terms of ideals, not in men's better insights into eternal truth and justice, that is spirituality or religion, but in changes in the modes of production and exchange. That is where you need to seek the insights. They are to be sought not in the philosophy, but in the economics of each particular epoch. Yeah. This, in essential, is Marxian thought. The evolution of mankind from the primitive society calls it a primitive communism, because they are not very conscious, they are still primitive, and therefore relations are not matured, and they live in a community life there, so it is called primitive communism. The next is the slave society. Classes, state, that is government, started appearing in various forms, maybe monarchy, maybe other forms of government, agriculture, democracy, authoritarianism, private property, all these things are in their early stages. The next is feudalism. Feudalism means the society is controlled by king and the feudal lords. Aristocracy, theocracy, hereditary classes, nation state. These are the features of feudalistic society. Then comes the capitalistic society. Market economy, because market economy had already fairly well developed. Adam Smith had formalized it, and it became very popular, and it was very formalized. It was very clear. Market economy, private property, parliamentary democracy, financial institutions, monopolistic tendencies. It has given rise to means of production and given rise to an industrial society where the bourgeois and the proletariats can be distinguished clearly, which is going to give rise to socialism, socialistic society, where the proletariat will capture power. There will be a planned economy. If you look at Russian, this thing, the 5-year plan originated in Russia, which is adopted by our country, Jawaharlal Nehru's 5-year plan were actually copied from the 7-year plan of Soviet Russia. Planned economy, common property, that is socialistic ownership, council democracy, and later it will give rise to a classless, stateless, propertyless society. Because propertyless in the sense all property will be belonging to all people. There are no individual property, all property belonging to all people. That kind of a society. Again, Engels, Marxism claims that like the rest of the material world, society too is governed by inexorable laws, by knowing which one can predict the course of human history accurately. Engels clarifies, he says, the materialist conception of history starts from the proposition that the production of the means to support a human life and next to production, the exchange of things produced is the basis of all social structure. Active social forces work exactly like natural forces. Social forces within the society work exactly like natural forces. Blindly, forcibly, and destructively. So long as we do not understand and reckon with them, but once we understand them, once we grasp their action, their direction, their effects, it depends only upon ourselves to subject them more and more to our own will, and by means of them to reach our own ends. A river is flowing, you swim along the flow. If you want to cross the river, swim along the flow. Don't swim against the flow. So understand the flow, the direction in which it is heading, and join the flow and swim. This is his advice. This is what most communists attempt to do. When industry requires investment in terms of, anyway, the modern industry certainly requires all these factors. Capital, infrastructure, technology, and human resource. So if you look at how a product is evaluated, you will see what are the investment in terms of each of these, and each of them is important. Money is required, infrastructure is required, the telephone, the roads, the railway, so to transport the raw material, and after that the final product, you need infrastructure, you need water, you need buildings, all these things. Technology is required, there is an investment in technology. Then human resources required to make them work. But the real value of a product, according to Marxism, is the labor invested on that. What is the real value? Real value is this. Then the pricing of the product may be higher than what you pay for the labor. But the capitalist would view it, the person who has invested would view it that I have invested money, I need interest out of it. I have bought property, I need returns from that. So I need this much of profit. So I will price it accordingly. But Marx would say that that is called surplus profit, and from which you are actually not paying the labor what is his due. You are undercompensating him and appropriate the profit. And this profit, of course, when you appropriate it by individual capitalists, they become rich and they become powerful. Because of wealth, they will become powerful. And if they become powerful, they will exploit you further. So this is the basic idea of a trade union movement. Therefore, the proletariat has to be awakened, and then he has to struggle against the capitalists and seek and wrest more compensation, more wealth from the capitalists. Otherwise, he is exploitative. That is the approach. Communist revolution. According to Marxist analysis, class conflict within capitalism arises due to intensifying contradictions between the proletariat and private ownership and private appropriation of the surplus value by a small minority of private owners called the bourgeois. As the contradiction becomes apparent to the proletariat, social unrest between the two antagonistic classes intensifies, culminating in a social revolution. The eventual long-term outcome of this revolution would be the establishment of socialism. Socialism would eventually give way to communist stage of development, social development. Communism would be a classless, stateless, humane society based on common ownership and the principle of from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Distribution as per the need, production as per the capacity. When in the course of development, all production has been concentrated in the hands of vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. The state will cease to be oppressive. People who are controlling the state will cease to be oppressive. Political power, properly so-called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeois is compelled by the force of circumstances to organize itself as a class, if by means of a revolution, it makes itself the ruling class and as such sweeps away the force and old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonism. So once the labor class seizes power, it will wipe out the capitalist class and therefore wipe out antagonism and conflict. Then there is no need for further revolution. There is no need for oppression because the proletariat class itself is controlling it. So all class antagonism will end, and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. This is Advaita. If there is only one, then there is no competition. So there is no need to compete. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonism, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Each one is allowed to prosper without hindrance. That is his model. That is, finally, it is the ideal. Yeah. But Marx had the perspicacity to see that this will happen. And he believed it with such intensity. Not only he, his followers also believe it with such intensity. That's why he called this as a religion. It's a faith system. Though they call themselves scientific, and therefore materialistic, and therefore reasonable, but in fact their faith is so strong, it is as strong as the Semitic religions. According to Marxist theory, higher phase communism is a specific stage of historical development that inevitably emerges from the development of the productive forces that lead to access, abundance to final goods. they will have access to the goods. Allowing for distribution based on need and social relations based on need, distribution based on need, and social relations based on freely associated individuals. Their association is not compelled, it is voluntary and it is free. Marxist theory holds that socialism, or the lower phase communism, being the new society established after the overthrow of capitalism, is a transitional stage in human social evolution and will give rise to a fully communist society in which classes and the state are no longer present, no longer needed. After the communist revolution in Russia, which is called the October Revolution, people believed that it is a socialist arrangement. That is the dictatorship of the Communist Party, which they called as dictatorship of the proletariat. And this will eventually give rise to a stateless, classless society after the state withers away. This was what their belief was in the initial stages of after the communist revolution. Lenin asserts that Marxism is a complete philosophy and the best that man has produced ever. Says Lenin, the genius of Marx consists precisely in his having furnished answers to questions already raised by the foremost minds of mankind. His doctrine emerges as the direct and immediate continuation of the teachings of the greatest representatives of philosophy, political economy, and socialism. The Marxist doctrine is omnipotent. We may say that the Vedantists would say God is omnipotent. But Lenin says Marxist doctrine is omnipotent because it is true. It is comprehensive and harmonious and provides men with an integral world outlook, irreconcilable with any form of superstition, any form of reaction or defense of bourgeois oppression. It is the legitimate successor to the best that man has produced in the 19th century, as represented by German philosophy, is talking about Hegel. English political economy is talking about Adam Smith, and French socialism. He's talking about the socialist revolution in France, socialist democratic revolution. But this is theory. But Marx predicted that as a natural consequence of the development process, a society which is developed industrially will give rise to a socialistic revolution. And he said the most developed country in the world today is England. Because the Great Britain had colonies all over the world. They had an empire where the sun never sets, and they have looted their colonies and became the richest country in the world. At the time of Marx writing these things, it was the most powerful country in the world. And naturally the most developed country in terms of industrial production. The Sheffield steel and the textile of Manchester and the Industrial Revolution, all these things made England the premier nation. And he predicted that the first revolution should happen would happen in England. But it did not happen, and there was no sign of happening. And the British labor class, I mean, he wrote his theory watching the British labor class laboring in the coal mines and in the mills, the textile mills and the steel mills, etc. But eventually the British society addressed their problems and resolved their problems internally, and it was not heading towards a revolution. But elsewhere the situation was bad. For example, in Russia, the situation was very bad because of the war. And Russia was not a very well-developed society. It was more of an agrarian society than an industrial society at that time. And it was under the Tsars. And during the First World War, they had a severe drubbings, and because of which their economy collapsed. And the condition was very bad in Russia. And it's at that time, the Russian communists, of course, I'm referring to a moment when Marx was still alive. Marx died in 1888 or so. So the Russian communists asked permission to Marx to go ahead in Russia, revolve Russia. And Marx conceded. And this is what he said. Marx predicted that socialism and communism would be the natural consequence of capitalist development. Contrary to the prediction of his theory, communist revolution occurred first in Russia, then one of the poorest countries in Europe, which had largely illiterate peasantry and relatively underdeveloped industry. Watching the developments, Marx rationalized, I'm talking about 1880s, not yet ripe for revolution. Revolution took place in 1917. Marx rationalized that Russia might be able to skip the stage of bourgeois rule, that is fully developed in industrial society stage, that may be skipped, you can revolve, he permitted his minions. The February Revolution, it is called February Revolution because there were two calendars, the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar. So according to one it is February, according to another it was March. There were two revolutions in Russia in 1917. One is called the February Revolution, another is called the October Revolution. In March 1917, according to Gregorian calendar, took place in the context of heavy military setbacks during the First World War, which left much of the Russian army in a state of mutiny. Food was scarce and the army was revolting. In the chaos, members of the imperial parliament, known as the Duma, assumed control of the country, wrested it from the king, forming the Russian provisional government. The Petrograd Soviet developed into an alternate source of authority to the provisional government under Prince Grigory and later Alexander Kerensky. The confusion was so much, there were two centers of power. And a period of dual power ensued, during which the provisional government held state power. It is from the provisional government, Lenin and his proletariat brigade, they seized power from the provisional government. In the October Revolution, the Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the provisional government in Petrograd. The Bolsheviks appointed themselves as leaders of various government ministries and seized control of the countryside, establishing the Cheka, that is state security, to quash dissent. This seizing of power was though it is called a revolution, there was not much of a revolution there. They simply seized power and the provisional government gave up. Not much bloodshed had occurred in that transaction, in that change. But this communist government, this communist revolution had tremendous impact across the world following the Russian Revolution. Following World War II, governments modeled on Soviet communism took power in Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Romania, and in Yugoslavia. I have listed 7 countries, Baltic nations, etc., etc. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was revolved, and then Cuba, then North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Angola, Mozambique were among the other countries who imposed a communist government in the line of Soviet Union with the support of Soviet Union. By the early 1980s, almost 1/3 of the world's population lived in communist states, including the former Soviet Union and People's Republic of China. That is the political impact of communism. But there is another impact which I call as more universal than the political. Political impact caused about 1/3 of the human population to come under the red flag. But outside this regime, across the world, all over humanity, Marxism had an impact. Tremendous impact it had. The impact of Marxism on human thinking has been universal during the 20th century. The materialist approach appeared in various garbs: socialism, secularism, scientific temper, etc. But the value system was based on the materialist outlook of life. Socialism was its front. But you see that socialism receded across the world. Now secularism still persists. Secularism is essentially what they are saying is materialistic outlook. Socialism was introduced in India by the government after freedom, Nehru's government. He was talking about socialism. And then finally Mrs. Gandhi, during the emergency, put it in the preamble of the constitution. Both words were put, socialist as well as secular. But today, even those who supported emergency and Mrs. Gandhi and this constitutional amendment and helped to put these words in the constitution, even they do not claim to be socialistic. Even the Congress Party does not talk about socialism anymore. So socialism is virtually dead. In Russia, it completely collapsed. In China, it is still called communist, but their principle of operation has changed from socialism. But secularism still holds ground at some places. Nehru was very fond of talking about scientific temper to wean away people from the religious outlook. So all these come from the same paradigm. Marxist understandings of history and of society have been adopted by academics in the disciplines of a variety of academic disciplines have accepted Marxian interpretations, if not entirely, but to a very dominant position. I mean, it has become very dominant. Various disciplines like archaeology, anthropology, media studies, political science, theater, history, sociological theory, art history and art theory, cultural studies, education, economics, geography, literary criticism, aesthetics, critical psychology, and philosophy. I'm quoting it from the Wikipedia. Somebody has compiled it very well. And see, many of these titles have nothing to do with the materialism. In fact, theater or anthropology and other things does not have to do anything with the materialism or Marxism. But they still have a dominant view, I mean, a dominant following in these fields who interpret history and these sciences also in terms of Marxian terminologies. In India, we have seen the literary figures talking about Marxism and say that unless a literature should have social concern. This is a very dominant thought in Kannada literature for the last several decades. It should talk about social reform, social revolution, and social concerns. To say that literature can be purely on the concept of beauty around that is anathema for many of them. They consider them retrograde. So this kind of influence has percolated across, whether you're communist or non-communist. For example, India is not communist, America is not communist. But the universities and academia are dominated by this kind of thought or this kind of people. So it is in that sense I say it had a universal impact, the universal impact of Marxism across the world. And even people who subscribe to other paradigms, pay obeisance to other paradigms, even they too are influenced to interpret their own experience in terms of Marxian terminologies. They try to do that. And very often we see this, any value is valuable if it is materialistic. We try to interpret things in materialistic terms. For example, why Tulasi is a religious symbol. It has a religious value because it is used for worshipping Vishnu. But then why Tulasi is important? We start interpreting, oh, it is malaria, it's anti-malaria, it is antiviral, this kind of terminology. Any value becomes valuable only in economic terms, in materialistic terms. That kind of influence Marxism has caused, wielded across the humanity. Marx's interpretation of religion is religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. He's talking in terms of paradoxical terms. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. And Lenin repeated this same sentiment using different terminology. Marxism counts not only religion, but there are 4 other points also listed here. They are known as negatives of Marxism. There are 5 negatives of Marxism considered highly objectionable, and Soviet Russia tried to suppress this, ban these items. But eventually it could not sustain that ban. So it withdrew. One of them is the family unit. Family unit is anathema to Marxism. And in the early years of after revolution, Lenin ordered that an experiment to be conducted that people are segregated, men and women are segregated and kept in camps. Of course, it is labor camps where the condemned were taken, but then the experiment were conducted that they were segregated, but they were allowed to join once a week. And as a consequence of this, men and women As a consequence of this, whichever children are born, and they were considered as state property without parents, without their own. This experiment failed miserably. Later on, they permitted family units to function in Soviet Russia. Nationalism is another. Nationalism is anathema to Marxism because communism is international. They had a platform called Comintern, that is Communist International. So when the communists across the world were trying to revolve in their own country, causing revolution in their own country, they always sought the help and direction from Soviet Russia, and Russia gave those directions, and the loyalty of the communists were more towards their fatherland, that is Russia, rather than their own country like India. When the Chinese attacked India in 1962, Indian communists were celebrating, on the side of on the side of China, because India had to retreat. So the victory was celebrated by Indian communists. Of course, there were difference of opinion also within their ranks, but essentially the outlook is that their fatherland is the communist land. However, in the 1940s, during the Second World War, when the war raged, Stalin found it necessary to invoke nationalism, urging his soldiers to fight for Russia. Instead of calling it Soviet Union, which was a new name given after revolution, he started calling it again Russia. And he reminded them of the great patriots of his nation, the earlier emperors and kings whom they were castigating earlier, Nevsky and other people. So he gave the call in the name of nation. And for several years, he addressed Soviet Union as Russia. Religion, the church was banned initially. I'll show you an example how they conducted themselves against the church. But then eventually they were allowed to function. In the 1950s, they said that they conceded that. So was private property, which is another negative of Marxism, should not be allowed. But then by 1960s, I say 60s because it must have been a little earlier only, because Chester Bowles was one of the ambassadors, American ambassador to Russia. In his memoirs, he has written that Russia relaxed the constraint on private property and allowed people to possess part of the land as private property. And usually what they allowed was a land where which is not very fertile. The fertile land was kept by the state, and not so fertile land was given for private ownership. But Chester Bowles says that the production from the private property was more than that was on the state controlled property, even though the extent was less and land was less fertile, because the private industry effort produced more than the state controlled experiments. And finally, the individual liberty was the last to be removed. Individual liberty was the first to be removed, but then it was conceded at the very end, sometime after Gorbachev took over in 1985. In 86, he initiated this glasnost and perestroika. Perestroika means reconstruction. Glasnost means freedom of speech. The moment he really, opened the society for free speech, it was not entirely free speech. The moment he started relaxing it, it went out of control. And the whole thing collapsed. the Russian system itself collapsed. By 1991, Soviet Russia was no more. So let me consolidate what I have said so far. The Marxist paradigm, I have identified some 7-8 points. Life in this planet will progress as per the omnipotent Marxist doctrine. The word omnipotent is that of Lenin, which is the doctrine known as the dialectic materialism and its projections. The evolution of society is governed by inexorable laws. Active social forces work exactly like natural forces, blindly, forcibly, destructively, just like any other laws of material sciences. If you say gravitational law works like this, and it is going to work like that across the universe, these social laws are also going to work like that, inexorably. History is interpreted using Marxist dialectics or Marxian dialectics. All conflicts are interpreted as class wars between the labor and capitalist classes. The driving motive behind all wars is disparity of wealth. Economic disparity is a cause for these wars, not religion or political ambition. If Ghazni Muhammad had attacked India, they would discount the religious component, religious motivation of that. They'll say it is economic reasons. Outcome is always destined, victory to the proletariat. So when the invaders succeeded, they would say it is a proletariat class, though not very distinguished as proletariat, but the Marxian eyes can detect proletariat among them, whereas the Indians were the oppressing capitalist class. That is the interpretation. Evolution of history is always progressive. Primitive to agrarian, to feudal, to capitalist, to socialist, communist. The human society will always progress in this direction. It may be a little delayed, but it will progress in this direction only. There is no retrograde movement. If somebody is saying that the past was better than the present, was glorious, then they would say it is counter-revolutionary. Science is on the pedestal. Science is a very respectable word in Marxism. Nothing in this world is essentially mysterious. The world is knowable through rational intellect, through science. And Marxism is a science. Therefore, see, all these disciplines, academic disciplines like social studies. When I was in the school, I had a subject called social studies, but soon it was changed into social science, political science. Politics is not science, but then political science. So the word science is a very respectable word under the Marxian ideology. Religions are like opium to the masses, created by the ruling class to deceive and dominate over the unsuspecting proletariat. All religions are opium only, but some religions are closer to Marxist, because it is convenient to align with them. They identify the proletariat class in those religions. In that case, they will align with them to defeat the capitalist class whom they perceive as capitalists. This you can see throughout history, especially Indian history. The communists are always aligned with the minorities, whom they consider as closer to the proletariat class. Propaganda has a premium over conscience. this is a very subtle point I'm mentioning. Conscience is something that is totally subjective, totally internal. See, all values, when you talk about values, ahimsa, satyam, asteyam, character, integrity, sincerity, honesty, all these things are values in the society. Who has to monitor these values? The conscience has to monitor. When nobody is watching how you behave, that is your value. So the monitor is your own sakshi. However, the Marxian philosophy doesn't put any premium, doesn't provide for an item called conscience. And therefore, it becomes very convenient to ignore that. Not that, you see, in spiritual paradigm, we talk about conscience, but yet there may be many people who do not follow it. Just because you pay obeisance to a particular philosophy, it is not easy to follow that. So if nobody is looking, I will do this. If people are looking, I will not do it. It is not proper. But then, if nobody is watching, I will do this. This is, you are giving a holiday to your conscience. A value is something which has to be maintained, observed, and commented upon by your own conscience. Then it becomes a value for you. But Marxism as a philosophy doesn't invest any value upon conscience, because it is an idea, it is a spiritual idea, and therefore it is anathema to Marxism. However, propaganda is important. Propaganda means how do you convince the rest of the society that you are this or that. So they invest a lot on propaganda and nothing upon conscience. This is the paradigmical stand. And it has a consequence. It has a consequence. Yeah. So spiritual and emotional values, the ideal with reference to the conscience, are seen only as compulsions to tide over exigencies. There can be a Marxist minister who takes oath, because the democratic process requires you to take an oath. What is the meaning of oath for the society? Yeah, he is becoming a minister and he has to take several decisions, and many of those decisions are taken in private, in secret. All data pertaining to a particular decision will not be released to the public because it can be a state secret, or it may not be simply not prudent to release it to the public. So we cannot demand that he release all details. There is something called Official Secrets Act. But the person who is assuming office on behalf of the society is assuring the society, saying that I will abide by God or conscience. And some of the secularists would say by the Constitution. They'll say the Constitution cannot monitor it. Only your own conscience can monitor it. But they will say, okay, this is a constitutional requirement. To become a minister, to assume power, I have to take oath. And therefore I take oath. But they don't mean it. And their paradigm doesn't compel them to take it seriously. Okay. This has an impact on the society. This is something which goes against Shraddha, what we call as Shraddha, what Swami Vivekananda called Shraddha, which is essential for a society to rise. Shraddha is needed for a society to develop itself. To grow in a particular direction is personal, but as a society also, to develop one's own culture, Shraddha is essential. However, Marxism doesn't lay any premium on conscience. Yeah. Under the spiritual paradigm, values of life are valuable because of spiritual benefit for oneself. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam. all values are intended to develop one's sattva. Sattva will lead you to jnanam. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam. As well as to one's family and society. That is dharma. Dharana dharma mityahu. Dharmo dharayati praja. The Bhagavad Gita lists several of these values. Abhayam, sattva samshuddhi, jnana yoga vyavasthiti, danam, dhamascha, yajnascha, swadhyayas, tapa, arjavam. None of them is a material value. These values are there so as to improve your sattva, reduce your tamas, control your rajas. And Krishna says, Daivi sampad vimokshaya, nibandha asuri mata. Asuri sampada is restrictive, it is binding, it develops karma, which you will have to struggle to release yourself. But Daivi Sampada is something that will increase your sattva, makes you see jnanam. Sattvat sanjayate jnanam. That is the purpose of values. So it combines not only the personal development, but also the social harmony and societal good. That is the purpose of value here. What these values do not make any sense for a materialist person. They do not make any sense because he doesn't put any premium on your jnanam or on your Bhagavan or your moksha. That is why when you discuss with the person of a different paradigm, that is materialist paradigm and say spiritualist paradigm, the two platforms, the two distinct platforms we stand on, the two platforms never meet. You keep saying the same thing from your perspective, and he keeps saying the same thing from his perspective. Whatever question you ask, his answer is the same, and whatever response he gives, you don't understand. So debates do not happen. Actually, jijnasa never happens. So only arguments happen, and the stated positions are repeated ad nauseam. Yeah, and therefore the agenda is clear that I want to dominate this society. How do I overcome that? For that, all kinds of propagandas are released, all kind of thing, and you can't fight them unless you understand how they think. Yeah, so this is what is the time now? 8. I think this I will postpone it to something else. I'll stop here. I have another 11 files regarding the communist regime. It may take 15-20 minutes. So I will postpone it to some other session.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine, sir. Thank you for the session. So now the session opens up for question and answers.
Yeah.
People who have questions, please use raise hand option of Zoom.
No
Yes,
questions.
Ragi, yes, please.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Quite insightful. I am still actually struggling with my question. The thing is, the whatever communism that Marx thought of,
Yeah.
I think has gone into a dictatorial mode today. So, because be it in Russia, where someone sees the government and became a dictator, or China, where everything is dictatorial, full control of the state. So that is one part. The second part, of course, is the clear lack of the conscience part. So these two were they the major cause of failure?
I mean, you want my comments on that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes. See, I would say the major, yeah, we can identify this as the major cause. In fact, I have not discussed it. I have postponed it because of lack of time today. The communist regime, how it operated in Russia, is part of my session in the thing which we have skipped today.
Okay.
It has become dictatorial and it become totalitarian. What is said is totalitarian thing. It tried to control all aspects of life. Many dictators, human history has seen many dictators, but they did not try to control all aspects. They tried to control those aspects which would threaten their power. But communism set out to say that it is a complete philosophy and try to control the various, all aspects of life. So that is called totalitarian kind of control. And eventually it became extremely oppressive. Extremely oppressive. You can't compare it with the other dictators. See, there was an Idi Amin in Uganda who was very oppressive. He killed 8 lakhs of people during his tenure. Now, if it is 8 lakhs there, Stalin killed something like 2 crores of people.
Okay.
And Mao Zedong killed something like 7 crores of people, his own people. So it became totalitarian, it became unresponsive, and they were backed by an ideology to do all this. Konrad Elst, an author, says that, see, many of these people conducted genocide. Huge mass murder they did. Because they were they were drawing justification from an ideology. And a single individual doing it for his own power, he doesn't have a backing of an ideology, is less oppressive than an ideological tyrant. And this has ample evidence in Russia and in China. And also in other communist regimes. When it is, so it became totalitarian, and totalitarian by design. It is not something that has incidentally happened. Marxian theory itself says that proletariat dictatorship is the stage of socialist society. So proletariat have to seize power and put down all kinds of antagonism. The capitalist class will otherwise it will become, it will try to wrest power from you. Therefore, put them down completely. And that was their the principle, their doctrine. And they did it.
Sir, I couldn't understand the link, sorry. You said they backed by their ideology, right? But
Yes.
the ideology was more of the state is not important. And actually one statement, one of the points I liked that was each person takes how much he needs and contributes.
Yeah.
So that's not, they misuse, is it like that?
Yeah, these statements are there, they are far in the future. One according to his own capacity, he will contribute and he will take according to his needs. This is an ideal utopia which he painted.
Yeah.
But the path to reach that was proletariat dictatorship. And then during that dictatorship itself, it got stuck. And the reason why it got stuck is that they were over-convinced that the ideology is true and it doesn't require any correction. It is a kind of faith which you see in the Semitic paradigm. It is that kind of a faith. It is a total faith in the ideology. There is no God, but there is an ideology. And the state withering away never happened. In fact, when it withered away, the Soviet Union itself was no more there. It did not wither away, it broke. So this concept saying that each according to this is an ideal, it will happen, he said, automatically. But the path is through proletariat dictatorship. Lenin claims that it is true. But if it were true, why did it fail? It failed everywhere. Everywhere. Today, no communist rule exists anywhere in the world. When I say no communist rule, according to the ideal that is propounded as classless, stateless, that kind of thing, nowhere is it there.
I'm still struggling with, no, when you say proletariat, I sort of took that as the real meaning of what Marx meant was more with the masses. But here actually it turned out to be in a way capitalistic in the hands of a few people who started controlling everything.
Yes, it is a communist party which started controlling everything. And the Communist Party General Secretary controlled the Communist Politburo. And the Politburo, the total control of one individual it came to be. In 1937, Stalin became the dictator. He became a dictator earlier, but then he gained complete control of the Politburo in 1937. And after that, the kind of havoc he created is unmentionable. So to say that it is only incidental would be a mistake. It is very natural that the philosophy is so renous that it failed. How else do you explain that? Wherever it became total, it failed totally. Wherever it became partial, it failed partially. Our Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru adopted several of these ideals from Soviet Russia. He was a materialist and he belonged to that paradigm. And there is a book called 97 Blunders of Nehru. Somebody wrote a book. That 97 he later revised in the next edition to 127. And if you start seeing the man, if you start reading it, you'll see how can one man make these many mistakes? He has access to all data which a government can give you. Entire machinery is at your disposal. But keep on doing the mistake after mistake. His economic policy was a failure. His defense policy was a failure. His Kashmir policy was a failure. Everything is a failure. His China policy, his Tibetan policy was a failure. And how can you make these kind of mistakes? I would say that you look at the paradigm on which he's working. He's trying to find a solution. His religious policy was a failure. So many problems it created, and it's still not resolved, many of them. I would say that it is not the intelligence of the man per se. It is also the paradigm. I would say the paradigm first. Because if you are looking for a solution, it should be able to provide you a solution. If it is a wrong philosophy, and these philosophies are India and materialist philosophy are diametrically opposite. The spiritual paradigm and materialist philosophy are diametrically opposite. And one of them may be right. Both cannot be right, right?
Okay, sir, there are still many questions. Maybe we'll move to the next question.
Yeah.
Maggie, anything else from your side?
Thanks. Sir.
Oh, okay, yeah, fine. Maggie. Next question from Satyabodha Kulkarni. Sir, please.
Sir, namaste, sir.
Namaste.
I'll just share some information before asking the question. There is one philosophy called objectivism, which is an offshoot by one of the philosophers who came from Russia. She escaped during 1925 from Russia and took shelter in America. I think you might have heard of Ayn Rand. She has written some books on this objectivism. Some of them are Virtue of Selfishness, then We the Living. We the Living is her story of escaping from Soviet Union. And she has written some a book on Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. So it is an offshoot of this capitalism adopted by a Soviet-born philosopher. My question is, sir, you mentioned about self-interest, that about say karma yoga and all that. So our four principles, like two of the purusharthas, which are aiming for abhyudaya, like artha and kama, they are also belonging to the self-interest only. But only the borderline is that they have to be obtained at the rather with dharma and not going out of dharma to obtain artha or kama. That is the restriction put. So what is your perspective on interpreting like this, that artha and kama, the two abhyudaya parameters, are they of self-interest, or can it be interpreted in any other way?
Yeah, when I say self-interest is all pervasive. See, even a sannyasi is motivated by self-interest. Atmano mokshartham. For himself, it is mokshartham. Then, of course, jagadhitaya cha. So the self-interest is there even in spiritual development. Yes. So that is a motive which drives people. That is fine. But when you talk about self-interest and selfishness in the context of the materialist paradigm, it is talking about material pleasures, sensory pleasures and material gains. They are bona fide. They are not to be disdained. They are not to be deprecated. They are bona fide. But it has to be done according to the norms of interaction, that is called dharma. So, whereas Adam Smith doesn't talk about dharma, he talks about self-interest. So my only caution is that, okay, self-interest is fine, but then it should be under the guidance of dharma. So Indian philosophy has matured to that level, where it talks about dharma, and dharma is of paramount importance. And it says, Yat Shreyo Rupam Atyasrajata Dharmam. Shreya means something that is spiritually beneficial. So dharma will take you towards spiritual growth along with artha and kama. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Next question from Anil Balakrishnan.
So my question is said about religion is the opium of the masses.
Yeah.
Now, not just in India, across the globe, we find that all the leftist, what do you call, academia, academicians, or the so-called intellectuals, they support Islamic terrorism.
Yeah.
How can they justify it from an ideological viewpoint? And in any country where Islam becomes majority or ruling, they will not tolerate atheism, and Marxist or communist will not be able to survive.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this. See, when they're looking at Islamic religion, they consider it as an ally against the more oppressive religions. For example, in India, communists have always sided with Islamic terrorism and Islamic, the minorityism. They have always done that. Even before the partition of the country, before the freedom of the country, they supported partition because they wanted to align with the Muslims. They consider them as more proletariat than Hindus. Hindus belong to the capitalist class. Islamics belong to the proletariat class. This is their classification. That is one. And then historically they justify, their interpretation of history is according to Marxian dialectics. See, Islamic invaders came, conquered us and started ruling from Delhi. This is a class war, they say. Why is it a class war? because they were prompted by wealth hoarded in the temples or in India, in various places, which they wanted to take. They were poor, therefore they belong to closer to the proletariat class. It may not be very clearly defined proletariat bourgeois type of classes in those days, but yet all wars are interpreted as class wars and proletariat against the capital. So they see proletariat class among the Islamists. Therefore, they support that. And if you say that, okay, Gupta period was a very glorious period, they will say you are harking back. The old society, earlier state of the society, you're trying to remember that you're retrograde. You're trying to reconstruct that you're retrograde, you're anti-revolutionary. The NCERT, the Indian NCERT, the establishment which gives guidelines to writing textbooks, had issued a circular saying that don't glorify Gupta period. It is forbidden. Under the influence of the communist academicians. So they look at it from the Marxian perspective. And there are historians in JNU who say that Ghazni Muhammad attacked Somanath not because of religious fervor, but because of the wealth hoarded in the temple. That's how they interpret. See, it is a projection of the theory onto history. They talk about rational things and all that, but then they don't consider facts as sacred. They will rather interpret their theory in terms of some obscure things they will dig out and say that, okay, this shows that it is a class war type of thing. Yeah. It is holding on to theory more than the facts.
Okay. And it'll
answer your question. Anil?
Yeah, more or less, because I'm in a lot of interaction with communists because I am from Kerala. From the college days itself, I used to have. Yeah. I am a Swayamsevak, so.
Yeah.
Okay, Adilji. Any other question? Sir, maybe I would like to add one point to your answer to Nagi's question. Why did communism collapse in Soviet Russia and let's say East Germany? In fact, see, communism also, there is the economic aspect of communism, right? And they try to meddle with that. And it was a materialistic thing. But the very parameter on which they were measuring, I think the economies in these countries collapsed. They just couldn't grow economically. So when the economy collapsed is when communism collapsed there.
Yeah, economy is one component. So life was so oppressive. I have not shown those files, but then life was so oppressive. If you kill people, any dissent was, completely demolished. People are arrested in the middle of the night. Thousands and thousands of people were sent to Gulag, Siberia. So this kind of approach makes life very oppressive. And people are fed up with that. They had made a mistake. They had made a mistake in becoming communist. You see, in 1890s, 1889-90, these East European countries, they would assemble. The sight was so emotionally overpowering. They would assemble and declare that we are not communists from today onwards.
Right, sir. But what I'm trying to point out is people who oppressed, they didn't prosper. That was the issue there.
Yeah, they didn't prosper. Even Soviet Russia did not prosper.
Then they would have become more powerful. They didn't prosper. The whole economy collapsed from that angle.
Yeah, that is there. See, one of the reasons was the economic reason is correct. See, even in Soviet Russia, when it collapsed, its economic condition was not something glorious. It was not.
Correct. Like one example I'll give, like East Germany and West Germany, both after post-independence, they were two separate countries. But and on the way, on one side, West Germany was capitalistic and democratic, and they were, for example, the world's top car manufacturers.
Yeah.
And there are all the top brands of the world are from West Germany. East Germany, in that 40 years, they had only one brand of car. That was called Tabej or something. So only one brand, like our ambassador car, they had only one, and they could not sell anywhere outside East Germany, that car.
Yeah.
So Harinath, just to build on that point, two things actually. One thing is I fully agree with you, economically they collapse, but I think the projection that they gave to the external world was perhaps different from what was the condition within the country. For example, Russia, first man in space, first one build the satellite, nuclear bomb, everything. They projected that they were doing well. That is one point. And second thing, again agree with you, because is probably China is still sustaining with this because it is economically become strong.
Yeah, probably so.
Agreed, Nagi.
Probably so. And China was more oppressive than even Stalin. Look at that Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
They just massacred people. So any dissent, any possible questioning, they would not tolerate. They are far more dictatorial than the Russians were. In the name of cultural revolution, they killed millions of people. More than that of Russia. Of course, just by comparing numbers, you can't say that, but then they are very, very oppressive, that is for sure.
The only thing is there is always this statements that come out, we don't know how much true it is, that we really do not know the actual situation in China. Okay. So that remains a mystery actually.
Correct, Nagi. I agree.
Sir, may I add one point? See, the commercial downfall or economic downfall could be due to this underlying philosophy that production is based on the ability and the consumption or distribution is as per the need. Need is fixed by the government. Need is equal. Everybody is given only this much. And production is as per the capability or ability. So nobody wants to produce. When they get everything equally distributed, why people will work? There was some WhatsApp thing going on. There was a small study that in the classroom, he says that everybody will be awarded the average grade. He will calculate the average of the class, and that grade will be awarded to everyone. And it is shown that gradually the grades of the average grade of the class fell down, so that they were not able to meet even the minimum parameters set by the teacher. Maybe that could be one of the things. Because those who wanted to study, they felt that, oh, anyhow I am getting this grade without any effort, why should I study? And those who anyhow they didn't want to study, they thought that I will get, whether I study or not, I will get this grade. So gradually the grades of the class, average grade of the class sank down. So a similar analogy could be there for economic downfall of this, say Marxian countries.
Marxian, even socialism, which we implemented in India post-independence, like after 1947 until 1991, we were socialist. We were socialist states. Economically, it did not progress. It is called the quota license Raj. It did not progress at all. India started opening up when the economic liberalization happened. So private initiative, private industry was honored, then things started growing. If it is a state control system, it will not grow.
Okay, sir. Any other question? Fine. No other question, sir. We can end the session.
Yeah.
The Shanti Mantra.
So Shanti Mantra. Oh. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah. Sarve
jantu nira
Sarve bhadrani pashyantu.
pashyantu
Chitkara.
Thanks everyone for attending today's session. Thank you, sir.
Dhanyawad. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.